Ademo. The following morning, Chibuza called a meeting with the elders once again. This time, the urgency in his voice was undeniable. He had faced down many enemies before, but the alliance between Teo and Ademo was unlike anything AGUNBE had ever seen. If they wanted to survive, they would need more than just the keepers, they would need the entire community to stand with them. As the elders gathered in Bola's workshop, Chibuza stood at the center of the room, his eyes scanning the faces of the men and women who had lived through the darkest days of AGUNBE. These were the people who had seen the community torn apart by violence and crime, who had witnessed the rise and fall of countless leaders. They were the heart of AGUNBE, and their support was critical. "We don't have much time," Chibuza began, his voice steady but filled with urgency. "Teo and Ademo are planning something big, and we can't fight them alone. The keepers are strong, but we need the people behind us. We need to show Teo and Ademo that AGUNBE won't be divided." Chief Okoye, the eldest of the group, nodded thoughtfully. "You're asking the people to take a risk, Chibuza. Teo's gang is dangerous, and many are afraid. How can we convince them to stand with you?" Chibuza took a deep breath, his mind racing with the enormity of the task before him. "We remind them of what we've built here. We remind them that AGUNBE is more than just a battleground for gangs. It's a community. A family. Teo and Ademo want to destroy that, but we won't let them. We fight for each other." The room was silent for a moment, the elders considering Chibuza's words. Finally, Bola spoke, his voice strong and clear. Chibuza intensified his patrols with the keepers. "We've come too far to let this place fall apart again. We're also trying to figure out a way to deal with we can face whatever comes our way." But despite his best efforts, the other elders, the inevitable confrontation arrived sooner than expected. They pledged their support. One evening, while Chibuza felt a surge of hope rising in his chest, a commotion broke out near the old marketplace. With the backing of the elders, he knew Chibuza was in the middle of organizing his team when one of the younger members, this was more than just a fight for control, came running toward him. It was a fight for the soul of their community. ODOGWU, as the meeting concluded, Chibuza stepped outside. It's Emeka. The weight of his responsibility Bola's workshop on his Chibuza's heart, but now there was a spark of hope. He didn't need to ask AGUNBE was more than just streets. It had to be Teo's men. As the days passed, it was the tension in AGUNBE grew, and as long as they stood united streets, no gangs, Chibuza intensified his patrols toward the marketplace. Keeping a close eye on the storms were also trying to figure out a way to become a ghost of its former self. But despite his best efforts to stay low, inevitable confrontation had already been caught in Teo's trap. Word had spread about the arrived at the marketplace. The scene was a commotion broke out near the air was thick with fear surrounded Emeka. Chibuza was in the middle of organizing blood dripping from one of the younger members. Both despite his attempts to rally the people, looking small and terrified, as though he had all. Not everyone believed in the strength of the keepers. His men held the ability to protect them. They've got him. Some were already inheriting living AGUNBE bloodshed. And didn't need to ask when they were. Teo said it had to be Teo's men before, and no one wanted to come to save the day. Chibuza sprinted through the narrow Chibuza patrolled the streets against the pavement and a few others stepped forward. He noticed the absence of the usual mind race, a mixture of fear and fear had fallen inside. This doesn't have to end bad. He wasn't right to stay water, but his brother had clearly been caught in Teo's trap. But it does. When Chibuza arrived at the marketplace, your brother also seen what I intend to collect, scanning the empty room unless you're willing to pay his debt. Who was on his knees? Chibuza's blood dripping suddenly above his flash of movement. Teo stood in the center, a young boy small, older than 10, but right now he had all the time on the ball and ran toward them. His men held the keepers back. Teo smiled wide, to a stop making it more than any wrong panting heavily to bloodshed. ODOGWU Mora. Well, ODOGWU said, his voice smooth. Chibuza crouched down to the boy's level, his heart racing. "What is it, little one? What's wrong?" "They are coming," the boy gasped, pointing toward the northern part of AGUNBE. "Teo's men. They are gathering at the old market." Chibuza's blood ran cold. The old market was an abandoned part of AGUNBE, long since deserted after years of violence. It was the perfect place for Teo to assemble his forces without drawing too much attention. Chibuza stood quickly, his mind racing. "Go home," he told the boy gently. Tell your family to stay inside and lock the doors." The boy nodded and took off running, disappearing down the street as fast as his legs could carry him. Chibuza turned to Chinedu and the others, his jaw clenched. "It's starting." As night fell, Chibuza gathered the keepers at their headquarters, the tension palpable in the air. He stood at the front of the room, his eyes scanning the faces of his men. Each of them was prepared for the fight ahead, though there was no mistaking the fear that lurked in the corners of their eyes. "We don't know exactly when Teo will strike," Chibuza began, his voice steady despite the anxiety gnawing at him. "But we know where." "The old market. That's where they're gathering. We need to be ready." Chinedu stepped forward, his face grim. "Are we going to hit them first?" Chibuza considered the question for a moment. It was tempting to take the fight to Teo's doorstep, to hit him before he could make his move. But there was something about the situation that didn't sit right with him. Ademu's silence worried him. For someone as cunning as Ademu, it didn't make sense to stay hidden for so long. He had to be planning something bigger. "No," Chibuza said at last. "We can't strike yet. We need to be patient. If we rush in, we'll walk right into a trap." A murmur of agreement swept through the room, though some of the keepers exchanged uneasy glances. It was clear that waiting wasn't what they had hoped to hear. They wanted action, to end the tension once and for all. But Chibuza knew better than to let emotions dictate their next move. "Patience is our greatest weapon right now," Chibuza continued. "Teo wants us to act impulsively. He's hoping we'll make the first move. But we won't give him that satisfaction. We defend AGUNBE, and when the time is right, we strike." Chinedu nodded, though his brow remained furrowed. "And if they attack first?" Chibuza's eyes darkened. "Then we show them what it means to cross the keepers." As Chibuza and the keepers prepared for the coming battle, trouble was brewing closer to home. Emeka, who had been trying to lay low since his encounter with Teo, was growing increasingly restless. The guilt of his mistakes weighed heavily on him, and he found it harder and harder to look his brother in the eye. One evening, as the keepers were making their final rounds of the neighborhood, Emeka found himself standing alone by the riverbank, his thoughts swirling. He had tried to make amends, to prove himself worthy of the keeper's trust again, but no matter what he did, the shadow of his past mistakes hung over him like a dark cloud. As he stood there, lost in thought, a voice called out from behind him. "Emeka." He turned quickly, his heart skipping a beat. To his horror, Teo was standing just a few feet away, flanked by two of his men. A cold smile spread across Teo's face as he took a step closer. "It's been a while, hasn't it?" Emeka's stomach twisted into knots. He hadn't seen Teo since that night, the night everything had gone wrong. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice shaky. Teo chuckled softly, his eyes gleaming with malice. "I've come to offer you a second chance, Emeka. You see, I've got big plans for AGUNBE. And I think you could be a part of them." Emeka took a step back, his mind racing. He knew what Teo was trying to do. He was trying to exploit Emeka's guilt, to pull him back into his web of deceit. "I'm not interested," Emeka said quickly, though his voice wavered with uncertainty. Teo's smile faded, his expression turning cold. "You really think your brother can protect you? ODOGWU morale might be strong, but he can't fight everyone. Sooner or later, he's going to fall. And when he does, do you really think the keepers will let you stick around after everything you've done?" Emeka clenched his fist, anger rising in his chest. "I'm not going to betray my brother again." Teo's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, the tension between them was so thick it felt like the air itself might crack. But then Teo's smile returned, slow and menacing. "We'll see about that," he said quietly. "But just remember, when the time comes, I gave you a way out. With that, Teyo and his men turned and disappeared into the night, leaving Emeka standing alone by the riverbank, his heart pounding in his chest. He had rejected Teyo's offer, but the seed of doubt had been planted deep within him. Could Chibuza really protect him? Could he protect AGUNBE? As Emeka walked back toward the keeper's headquarters, a terrible sense of foreboding settled over him. The storm was coming, and when it hit, everything would be changed forever. The day after the unsettling meeting by the river, Chibuza wasted no time. He knew Teyo's next move would come soon, and the keepers had to be prepared. As dawn broke over AGUNBE, he stood in front of the keeper's compound, watching as his men assembled. Each of them carried the weight of what was to come, the silence broken only by the clink of weapons being strapped into place and the hushed murmurs of last-minute preparations. These were boys who had grown into men too soon, hardened by the streets, yet still brimming with loyalty to their leader. Chibuza scanned the group, his gaze lingering on Emeka, who stood off to the side, looking troubled. Ever since Emeka's brush with Teyo, Chibuza had noticed a change in him, a subtle shift in his demeanor that worried him. But there was no time for doubts now. They were all about to face a trial unlike any other. "We've trained for this," Chibuza began, his voice calm but strong, cutting through the tension like a knife. "We knew this day would come. Teyo thinks he can take AGUNBE from us, but we won't let him. This is our home. We fight for it." The men nodded, some gripping their weapons tighter, others exchanging glances that spoke of both fear and resolve. Chibuza knew what they were thinking, knew that many of them were scared. But he also knew that deep down, they were ready. They had no choice but to be. "Remember, we don't strike first," he continued, pacing in front of them. "We defend our ground. Let them come to us. They'll expect us to be reckless, to charge in. But we are smarter than that." Chinedu stepped forward, his face set in determination. "The old market is where they'll hit first, right?" Chibuza nodded. "That's where they'll gather. We'll need scouts watching every entrance, every corner. We need eyes on them at all times." "Emeka and I can handle that," Chinedu volunteered. But when he glanced at Emeka, he noticed his brother seemed distant, as though he wasn't entirely there. Chibuza hesitated for a moment but nodded. "Stay sharp. No mistakes." As the day wore on, Emeka's internal struggle deepened. Teyo's words from the night before still echoed in his mind, seeping into his thoughts like poison. Could Chibuza really protect him? Could he protect AGUNBE? The doubt gnawed at him, no matter how much he tried to shake it off. He hadn't told Chibuza about the encounter with Teyo, and that silence felt heavier than anything else. Guilt twisted in his gut, but fear kept his mouth shut. The truth was, Emeka didn't know if he could survive this war, if any of them could. As he and Chinedu scouted the old market, his mind kept wandering back to Teyo's offer. It would be so easy to give in, to take the out Teyo had offered him. But then, what would that make him? A traitor? A coward? Could he really betray his own brother, the only family he had left? "Emeka," Chinedu's voice cut through his thoughts, pulling him back to the present. Emeka blinked and turned to his brother. "What? You seem off," Chinedu said, narrowing his eyes. "You're not focused." "I'm fine," Emeka lied, though his voice wavered slightly. Chinedu studied him for a moment, his brow furrowed in concern. "You sure about that? Because we can't afford any distractions right now. Not with what's coming." Emeka swallowed hard, nodding. "I know. I'm good." But even as he said the words, he could feel the doubt creeping back in. What if Teyo was right? What if Chibuza couldn't protect him? What if the keepers weren't strong enough to win this fight? "Stay focused," Chinedu said firmly, giving his younger brother a pat on the shoulder. "We are in this together." Emeka nodded again, but as they continued their surveillance of the old market, his thoughts were miles away, tangled in a web of fear and uncertainty. That night, as the keeper stood watch over AGUNBE, the attack came sooner than anyone had expected. It started with a sudden shout from one of the sentries. "They're coming!" In an instant, chaos erupted. Teyo's men, masked and armed, poured into the streets from all directions. They moved swiftly, with a precision that spoke of careful planning. It was an ambush, a calculated assault designed to catch the keepers off guard. Chibuza was on his feet immediately, shouting orders as the keepers scrambled to defend their territory. "Get into position. Hold the line." His voice rang out above the din, a beacon of calm in the midst of the storm. But even as the keepers rushed to defend their positions, it was clear that Teyo's gang had the advantage. They had the numbers, and they were well organized. Chibuza's heart raced as he realized just how deep the trap had been laid. Teyo had been waiting for this moment, luring them into a false sense of security before launching his assault. In the chaos, Chinedu and Emeka fought side by side, their knives flashing in the moonlight as they fended off attackers. But Emeka's mind was elsewhere, distracted by the doubt that still plagued him. Every swing of his blade felt heavier than the last, every decision slower. "Stay with me," Chinedu shouted, blocking a strike aimed at his brother's chest. Emeka nodded, but his grip on his weapon faltered. His mind was spinning. Was this it? Was this how it would all end? He thought of Teyo's offer again, the promise of safety, of survival. Maybe. His hesitation was all it took. An attacker lunged at Emeka from the side, and before he could react, Chinedu was there, blocking the strike with his own body. There was a flash of steel, a sharp intake of breath, and then Chinedu staggered backward, clutching his side as blood began to seep through his fingers. "Chinedu!" Emeka's voice broke with panic as he caught his brother before he could collapse. "I'm fine," Chinedu grunted, though his face was pale, and the wound was deep. "Just keep fighting." But Emeka couldn't move. He couldn't think. All he could see was the blood, the price of his hesitation. Teyo's men were still advancing, the sounds of battle growing louder, but all Emeka could focus on was the sight of his brother, injured because of him. And then, through the chaos, Emeka saw him, Teyo. He stood at the edge of the fray, watching the battle unfold with a cruel smile on his face, as if he were enjoying every moment of the carnage. Emeka's grip tightened around his weapon, his heart pounding in his chest. The weight of his choices pressed down on him, threatening to crush him completely. Was this his fault? Could he have prevented this? Or had Teyo been right all along? As the battle raged on around him, Emeka made a decision. He wouldn't let his brother's blood be spilled in vain. No matter what it took, he would fight. For Chibuza. For AGUNBE. For himself. As the chaos of battle surged around them, Emeka cradled Chinedu, desperately trying to staunch the flow of blood from his brother's wound. The sounds of violence echoed in his ears, mingling with the pounding of his heart. Adrenaline surged through him, but all he could think about was the stark realization that he might lose the most important person in his life because of his hesitation. "Stay with me, Chinedu. Please," Emeka shouted, pressing his hand against the wound, panic rising in his throat. Chinedu's face twisted in pain, but he forced a weak smile. "I'll be fine, little brother. Just focus on the fight." Emeka nodded, but his resolve was crumbling. In the midst of chaos, the shadows of doubt that had plagued him began to fade. He couldn't let his brother down again. He wouldn't let Teyo's gang destroy their home. With newfound determination, Emeka stood, gripping his knife tightly. He scanned the battlefield, spotting Chibuza at the forefront, leading the keepers with an intensity that inspired fear in their enemies. Chibuza fought with a fierce resolve, his dark skin glistening with sweat and blood as he cut through Teyo's men like a whirlwind. Emeka could see the weight of leadership in his brother's eyes, a weight he himself had been too scared to bear. But now, Emeka understood what he had to do. With one last look at Chinedu, he made his way through the melee, dodging blows and striking back against the attackers. Every step felt like a small victory, pushing aside the doubts that had held him captive for so long. As he neared Chibuza, he noticed Teyo's figure looming in the distance, backing orders like a general on the battlefield. Emeka's heart raced. He could see the cruel glint in Teyo's eyes, the same eyes that had haunted him in his nightmares. With a surge of adrenaline, Emeka shouted, "Chibuza! I'm with you." Chibuza glanced over, his eyes widening in surprise. "Emeka," he called back, but the moment was fleeting. The battle continued to rage, and Teyo's forces were relentless. Fueled by a mixture of fear and determination, Emeka reached Chibuza just as Teyo's men began to push back against the keepers. The tide of the battle was turning, and the feeling of impending defeat threatened to swallow them whole. "Emeka, you're here!" Chibuza exclaimed, relief flooding his expression. But there was no time for celebration. The battle was far from over, and they needed to fight as one. "We have to take out Teyo," Emeka said, his voice steady now, his resolve unshakable. "He's the one leading this attack." Chibuza nodded, their eyes locking in mutual understanding. "Let's end this." With synchronized determination, they pushed through the chaos, fighting their way toward Teyo. The air crackled with energy, filled with shouts and the clash of weapons. Emeka felt a sense of purpose swell within him, growing stronger with each step he took alongside his brother. Finally, they found themselves face to face with Teyo, who stood at the center of a small group of his men. A wicked smile spread across Teyo's face as he noticed the two brothers approaching. "Well, if it isn't the infamous ODOGWU and his little brother. You think you can take me down?" Chibuza stepped forward, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. "This ends tonight, Teyo. AGUNBE belongs to its people, not you." Teyo laughed, a dark, chilling sound. "You're foolish to think you can challenge me. I've already won." With that, Teyo lunged forward, and the battle between the three began. Steel clashed against steel as Emeka and Chibuza fought side by side against Teyo and his men, every swing of their weapons a testament to their resolve and loyalty. Emeka felt the adrenaline surge through him as he fought, his previous doubts replaced with clarity and purpose. He and Chibuza were united, brothers against a common enemy. The battle raged on, and Emeka could feel the tide beginning to turn. Chibuza fought with a ferocity that was awe-inspiring, a true leader embodying the spirit of AGUNBE. But Teyo was cunning and fierce, matching Chibuza blow for blow, and Emeka knew they had to end this soon. With a swift move, Chibuza knocked one of Teyo's men to the ground and turned his attention back to Teyo, his dark eyes filled with determination. "This isn't just about us anymore. It's about everyone in AGUNBE." Teyo's eyes darkened, and for a moment, the facade slipped. "You think they care about you? They're only loyal to whoever holds the power. And right now, that's me." "No!" Emeka shouted, stepping forward, anger coursing through him. "They are loyal to us, to the keepers. They believe in what we stand for." As Teyo lunged at Chibuza, Emeka made a split-second decision. He dove in front of his brother, his heart racing as he felt the rush of air from the blade slicing past him. "No more, Teyo. We are done playing your games." In that moment of desperation, Emeka found a strength he never knew he possessed.
The clang of metal hitting the ground echoed through the battlefield as Teyo stumbled back, shock and disbelief crossing his features. Chibuza stood firm, breathing heavily, his eyes locked on Teyo. "This ends now," Chibuza declared, his voice steady and filled with the weight of their shared history. "No more bloodshed. No more fear. It's time for AGUNBE to heal." Teyo's expression twisted into anger, but the fight was gone from his eyes. He realized that he had been defeated, not just by Chibuzur, but by the unwavering spirit of the community he sought to control. With a final, defeated glare, Teo turned and fled, his remaining men scattering in the face of their leader's defeat. The weight of tension lifted as the keepers stood victorious, but the cost of that victory hung heavy in the air. Emeka rushed to Chinidu's side, finding him on the ground, surrounded by their comrades. "Chinidu," he called out, dropping to his knees beside his brother. "Did we win?" Chinidu managed, a weak smile breaking through his pain.
Yes.
"We did," Emeka replied, tears of relief blurring his vision as he cradled his brother's head in his lap. "You're going to be okay." As the dust settled, the people of AGUNBE emerged from their homes, faces filled with disbelief and gratitude. They saw the keepers standing strong, a beacon of hope in the aftermath of chaos. Chibuzur turned to Emeka, the bond between them stronger than ever. "We did this together, brother." Emeka nodded, his heart swelling with pride. They had fought for their home and won, but they knew the journey was far from over. Together, they would rebuild AGUNBE, fostering unity and strength in the community, ensuring that what had been lost would never be forgotten. As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, Chibuzur, Emeka, and Chinidu looked out over AGUNBE, knowing they had triumphed against the darkness. This was their moment, a new beginning filled with promise, hope, and the unwavering belief that together they could overcome anything.